All kind of authoritarian structures in the world, they all ought to be challenged. Very few of them can resist that challenge. They survive mainly because they're not challenged. They're not really very strong. They look strong, but there's a point that was made by David Hume a couple hundred years ago, which is worth bearing in mind. He raised a kind of paradox of power. He said, how does power sustain itself? He said, if you think about it, power is always in the hands of the people who are oppressed. It's in the hands of the governed. They really have power. And this is true of the most oppressive society, what we would call totalitarian society, as of the most free. Power is in the hands of the governed, so how come they submit themselves to the authority of others? He said, well, force is an element, but he said the real element is opinion. You have to control their opinion. Of course, he was in favor of it. You know, he's a Tory. So he says, well, what you have to do is make sure you control the opinion of the people. Meaning make them believe, make them saturate their minds with ideology, carry out what we call propaganda. Didn't have the term in those days. And control their opinion, and you got them. That means you change their aspirations, you restrict their aspirations to personal things, to commodities, to break down the natural bonds among people, force them to forget what they understand, that they basically want freedom and independence and justice and so on. Every child understands that. So you have to work really hard to drive it out of their heads. And if you can drive it out of their heads and you control their opinion, then they'll submit. And they'll submit whether you're a brutal state or a more free society. In fact, it's more important in the free societies. In the 20th century, when in Hume's day, there wasn't much difference. Every society was absolutist. But as the societies differentiated over the years with popular struggles and winning the franchise and so on and so forth, the difference between the freer societies and the more like totalitarian or command societies became clearer. And a point began to be understood that Hume didn't talk about, and that is that control of opinion is much more important in the free societies. So like in, say, Soviet Russia, they didn't really care much what people thought. Franco Spain, let's say, fascist state, people read much more broadly and widely than they do in the United States. It's true, in fact. You go to a Marxist bookstore, if you got out of line too much, okay, they send you to the torture chamber in downtown Madrid. But since there were techniques of control, just by force, there was not much, wasn't much concern about what people thought. It's sort of believe what you like, we'll beat you over the head with a bludgeon, When you get to the freer societies, there's a lot more concern with what people think. And that has been understood. That's part of the reason for the rise of the public relations industry in the United States. Public relations industry is a propaganda agency of business, it's an American creation. It was created in the early part of the century to try to, as they put it then, to control people's minds. And that's, I don't know if they read Hume, but, it's not a deep point. Anybody can understand it without reading Hume. They understood that unless you control people's minds, we're going to be in trouble. People's mind, what was called in the business press, the greatest hazard facing industrialists is the rising political power of the masses. I'm quoting. You recognize that the business press is very Marxist, super Marxist. All the values are inverted, but they believe in class struggle. They talk about the masses, and beating down the masses and all that sort of thing. In fact, business press reads kind of like Maoist tracts, little red books and things, just with all the values reversed. And they understood that you've got to control people's opinion because, as Hume put it, power is in the hands of the governed, if they ever realize it. And if they realize it and they try to recognize what their own values are and pursue them, we're really going to be in trouble because there's not going to be any way to control people.
The current moment, not just political, is the most grim moment in human history. We are now in a situation where this generation, in fact, in the next few years, is going to have to make a decision of cosmic significance, which has never arisen before. Will organized human society survive? And there are two enormous threats. It's the threat of environmental catastrophe, which at least is getting some attention, not enough. The other is the threat of nuclear war, which is increasing sharply by the Trump administration, in fact. These have to be dealt with quickly. Otherwise, there's nothing to talk about. And notice that the wrecking ball in the White House just doesn't give a damn. He's having fun. He's serving his rich constituency. So what the hell? Let's destroy the world. And it's not that they don't know it. Some months ago, maybe a year ago by now, one of the Trump bureaucracies, the National Transportation Administration, came out with what I think is the most astonishing document in the entire history of the human species. Got almost no attention. It was a long 500-page environmental assessment in which they tried to determine what the environment would be like at the end of the century. And they concluded by the end of the century, temperatures will have risen 7 degrees Fahrenheit, approximately. That's about twice the level that scientists regard as feasible for organized human life. The World Bank describes it as cataclysmic. So what's their conclusion? Conclusion is we should have no more constraints on automotive emissions. And the reasoning is very solid. We're going off the cliff anyway, so why not have fun? Has anything like that ever appeared in human history? There's nothing like it. Corporations are concerned with what they call reputational risk. They're starting to hate us. We're in trouble. Actually, domination is very thin. It's only by consent. People withdraw consent, the whole thing collapses, and they know it. And so you take a look at the Davos meeting last January. It's very interesting. Every January, as you know, the rich and powerful gather at a ski resort, fancy ski resort in Switzerland, Davos, and congratulate each other on how marvelous they are. CEOs, Hollywood stars, media figures, and so on, go skiing. This year was different. The theme this year was they're coming after us. We're facing reputational risk. We got to do something. So the line that they projected was, we've been doing wrong things. We know it. The last 40 years, we haven't been working for you the way we should be. But now we're reformed. We realize we made mistakes. We apologize. Now we're dedicated humanists. You can put your faith in our hands. We'll take care of you. We hear this periodically. In the 1950s, it was, we're going to be soulful corporations. Not just for money, we're going to be soulful corporations. Well, we had 60 years of that. Now we're going to be deeply humanitarian corporations. So just go home, put your faith in us, and push the lever, go home, be spectators, not participants. And we'll make sure that everything works properly for you because we're so dedicated to your welfare. Well, people can either accept that or not. If you don't accept it, keep hammering away, you make progress. That's how every positive change has ever taken place. The power doesn't give you gifts.
Right.
They grant you something that they're forced to.
Right.
When they can't have an alternative. J.P. Morgan Chase, biggest bank in the United States, a leaked memo appeared, a secret internal memo, a couple months ago. It was warning that they have to stop their funding of fossil fuels because it's causing reputational risks. People are going to withdraw. Okay, that's the answer.
Yeah.
Until you manage to dismantle the system. It's a system that shouldn't exist,
Right.
but we're not going to dismantle it by snapping a fist. It's going to take a lot of work.
Right.
Meanwhile, you can force it to accommodate your needs, just as social democracy developed in Europe, just as the New Deal developed here, just as civil rights developed and women's rights, the environmental movement, anti-war movement, anything you can think of.